Okay, awesome. I just want to throw out there very quickly before we go through introductions for everyone that has joined today's call. One, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Two, by default, everyone, as you're joining in through Zoom webinars, you will be muted. Let us know. Today's call is really designed to be an open discussion and have an open forum with you all. So as you have questions, let me know. I've got the ability to give you the option to unmute yourselves, raise your hand, send me a chat. We want to engage with you all. And like I said, have an open discussion. So please don't be shy.
Thanks, Lexis. Absolutely. We will want you guys interacting. Thank you for being here. Today we're all about tech insights, but also an open forum for you. And one of the big conversations that we have seen happening recently, as everybody knows, is AI and security. Clearly also connected to ChatGPT and how can we start leveraging these tools in the workplace. So that's a big part of the topic today, but I will introduce our main speaker, Richard, here and his skill sets, and we encourage you to engage us in what's happening with your business right now, what's happening with your initiatives today that we can offer our insights to. Tech Insights is really meant to be a way for Managed Solution to engage with our community. We don't want you guys to just be on the other end of a phone call or on the other end of an email. We would like to talk with you. And so this is one of our ways of doing that. So like Alexa said, please, if anything triggers you, if you get a question, that may seem off topic, but was, triggered by our conversation, please let us know. That really is the biggest part of today.
Cool.
So, just really quick introductions. My name is Jessica Shanann. I am an account executive here at Managed Solution. I've been with the company almost 4 years now. And so I am in the trenches talking to customers day in, day out about what's happening in their business, their challenges, and working with our engineers such as Richard to come up with solutions that really solve for business problems. Alexis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jess. My name is Alexis Hesseltine. I am the channel manager here at Managed Solution. I actually joined last August, so pleasure to be here speaking with you all. My role with Managed Solution is primarily working with partners and our trusted advisors within the channel and really connecting them and their clients that are seeking various solutions with technical experts from our team. So I'm really here as additional support, not only to you all, but everyone on our team. So looking forward to today's discussion.
And I will introduce Richard. And it's such a pleasure to introduce you, Richard, because we talk to you all the time and you are such an integral part of our business internally and our customers' businesses externally. So Richard here has had over 15 years of experience in IT. Over half of that time has been diving deeply into security, and he's consistently on the bleeding edge of not just security, but everything kind of modern workplace, modern IT. And also I thought it was important to let you guys know that he's held various IT positions and leadership roles within this field. And I feel like that's relevant because if you are having challenges in any area of your role, he's such a great person to come to. He's gone all the way from help desk to this director role that he's in today. And so he's just got that depth of knowledge. He's got a ton of expertise, but just a few bullet points here. Like I mentioned, modern workplace, O365, Azure, Viva specifically is such a new topic for so many organizations. And Richard's got a ton of depth and knowledge in Viva. Microsoft security tools as well. He is an integral part of facilitating our internal compliance strategies and customer strategies as well, and has been for many years. He's supported compliance strategies and been the leading designer of those for, can't name names, but some large organizations that are, they're publicly traded organizations. So he's just had that level of experience. And he's also experienced in, processes and procedures and implementing those to improve and grow business. And of course, what we're talking about today is AI and the modern workplace. And again, let's not stick to AI necessarily, or doesn't have to be specific to AI and security or questions, but these are some of the areas that Richard's goes really deeply on. And I encourage you to just think about what's going on in your business that you can ask him. So I'm going to stop screen
Thank you
sharing.
for the intro.
You're welcome.
That's a really nice intro. Thank you.
It's true. Look, I mean, I love talking to you. Every time, I get a few minutes with you, I get such a dense amount of information about any question I have. And so I want everyone here to understand who they have in front of them and the level of knowledge and depth of knowledge that they have accessible in this hour. And I would really love for everyone to take advantage of that. Cool. So I'm going to kick us off. As I ask Richard a couple of questions here, please raise your hand and think of questions that you want to ask him as well, specifically around your business and your team. Richard, what are some of the most common questions that you're getting right now from our customers around AI and security? This is a really broad one, so we can go as deep as you want.
Yeah, so I right off the bat, I think the number one request is how do I use it, right? So how do I start using ChatGPT, Google Bard? How do I start implementing those procedures in my business? One thing I usually like to let people know is that this is a relatively new space. Well, let me rephrase that. AI sort of falls into a bunch of different categories. And what's really exciting right now is the generative AI. So stuff like ChatGPT, DALL-E with the sort of the pictures. And so people are interested sort of what is the best way I can apply these generative AIs to my business so I can increase productivity and sort of lower the bottom line, make sure reduce costs and all that. There's also concerns about, how that's going to impact my employees and sort of the security concerns, but by and far the number one thing is how do I put ChatGPT in my existing process? And to that, the main thing I usually recommend to our clients is a little bit of caution, right? These tools and services are really new. The organizations that are publishing these tools, like Microsoft, OpenAI, and Google Bard, they're doing a relatively slow rollout. There's a lot of concerns about how these are going to impact organizations. There's a lot of concerns about compliance and security. So if we start, proliferating all these different tools everywhere, how is that going to impact the actual security? Part of the reason why we want to have this conversation is because I think a lot of people are not necessarily taking the time to think about how is something like ChatGPT going to affect my company. They're sort of interested in using the productivity suite, which is really awesome. But at the same time, are you going to cause any undue stress, or are you going to cause any security breaches, a HIPAA? The last thing we want is if you're a HIPAA organization for you to have a bunch of people start putting in medical data and random ChatGPT.
I think people are also worried about falling behind, right? How is it going to affect
that is true. This is unfortunately the Pandora's box has been open for this. It's out there. Like one way or another, you're either going to be left behind, or you're going to embrace the new technology. But I do recommend sort of starting small and sort of controlling the kind of the rollout. Unfortunately, these tools also, even if you decide to stay behind and maybe your organization just simply doesn't want to start embracing tools like ChatGPT, these same tools can also be used to sort of target things directly. So for an example of that would be, AI is generative now. So you can feed it some information and have it spit out something that's pretty good to accurate. And these generative AIs can start creating emails that look like they're coming from your CEO, look like they're coming from your accounting people. They can generate audio and video now. So if they get enough data, they could potentially create a video or audio call that is literally sounds like your boss telling you to do a wire transfer. And so, these tools are going to force the security landscape to really change, right? At the same time, these same tools can also be used to sort of help you over that hump. So it's a little bit of, pros and cons, but unfortunately they're out there. One way or another, you're going to see, I think Apple just literally had their WDC event, and they just announced a bunch of new AI tools that are just going to be built into your iPhone. And like you're going to be able to do a lot of this stuff really easily. So it's really important for you to embrace the technology change, but and be on the lookout on what's the best ways to sort of protect your organization from a security and governance compliance perspective. Hopefully that answered that question.
Well, I think it did, because, I asked you what are the most common questions you're getting around security and AI right now.
Mhm.
And, in what you just mentioned, you straddle the balance between leveraging it for your business and making sure that it doesn't hurt your business and backfire on you, right? You also mentioned something that I think is key. You said it briefly, but I want to kind of double down on it. You said start slowly. Can you help us understand what does that mean to you? Like if we have a customer, and I actually have a client right now that I'm working with to implement, let's say, Viva technology, and getting a little bit deeper into Viva, knowing that there is AI there. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand how AI is actually already integrated into some Microsoft tools, but we're starting to leverage that in their business so that they, the IT director can go to the CEO and deliver these KPI, data points and additional data points that, they can leverage within the tools we're using. So I'm in this every day, and, I'm with you in the trenches here, but can you explain to everyone what does, starting slowly mean?
Yeah, so I recommend, if your compliance and security strategy right now isn't rock solid, right? If your the way that you organize your data, the way you grant access to files, documents, your email, all these different sort of baseline security tools, if they're not solid, when you add AI, you'll find out that very quickly there's going to be issues, right? So for example, Copilot, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, which is Microsoft's main sort of AI push that they're doing, relies on your existing infrastructure, right? So if you don't have your SharePoint, your Microsoft Teams, your email, your Azure AD set up and dialed in appropriately, then it's not going to work. It's not going to be able to prevent someone, for example, from querying your, if someone has access to a bunch of documents that they shouldn't, just in general, the AI is going to respect those boundaries, but if those boundaries aren't set up to begin with, then you're going to have situations where people can be like, hey, can you give me my CEO's salary or something like that? Because that's ultimately one of the things that, that is a concern. If someone asks this AI, is it going to get confidential or sensitive information? And, all these tools rely on pre-existing compliance and security standards that Microsoft has. So I really do recommend, ask yourself, where are we in sort of the security and compliance journey? Have we set up MFA? Have we done review of how our access process works? Have we set up teams in such a way that we're confident that people don't have access to teams that they're not supposed to? Content data, that sort of thing. Do you have retention policies? Like all those kind of different conversations that are pre-traditional Office 365. That is where I would recommend starting first. And if you have that rock solid, then you can start sort of kind of proceeding with that. Once you start going down the process of implementing AI tools, then just like with any other implementation, I recommend having key goals that you're trying to accomplish, right? Have that written out, understand who your stakeholders, understand what your success criteria is when you're implementing things like Copilot or Viva or anything like that. And then, start with a limited pilot, start with 5-10 users, make sure that you're kind of knocking it out of the park. And then before you then start, opening up to everyone, just make sure that you've kind of understood how it's going to impact your users. So really a pilot with a limited number of users is where I highly recommend you start. And then from there, go wild.
No, that's awesome. So I heard lock in and solidify, the basics. Have a goal, know your stakeholders, and then do a small pilot. And that's probably the safest way to start slowly into AI, especially since it's new right now. Now is really the time to start doing these things. I think this is a great pausing opportunity. And I want to just ask everyone attending can you please put a 1 in the chat box if your organization is not using O365 or heavily invested in Microsoft as your main platform? I'm just curious, like, I'm going to assume if we don't see any ones in the chat box, that everyone here is on O365 right now, and that this is applicable in that space for you.
Cool. I was worried that we're going to start seeing a bunch of ones.
I expect to not see too much, but I want to know if any of this is not applicable to somebody who's attending who, you know, this information could be valuable to. So I'm not seeing...
not too many, not many at all. Yeah, I mean, I think if you're on Google Workspace or some of these other platforms, the limitations have always been compliance and security tools, generally speaking. And so they're great productivity tools. And, you know, Google, you know, we all went to college and used Google Sheets. And so I'm definitely familiar with that. You know, I know a lot of small business owners that use Google Workspace. But as someone that's worked with a lot of kind of compliance things, when we go up to, hey, you know, I want to make sure everything's secure and compliant, that's where you start finding some of the limitations with Google Workspace. And Google Workspace, to be blunt, is probably the only other, I mean, it's Google Workspace with Slack to a certain extent. And so I'm not really surprised that for organizations that are serious about security and compliance, they are relying on Office 365. It's sort of the gold standard.
Yeah, same here. So then knowing that everyone, now thank you all for confirming that you're on O365. Now that we know that, can you please, you know, let us know, what are your questions? Like Richard just gave some really good, you know, very early stage nuggets. And if my spidey senses are right, and I'm, like I said, talking to customers every day, there are a lot of questions out there about AI and security. But, you know, sometimes people have a hard time knowing where to start. So now I'm just going to take like a second.
I just noticed that the setting is currently set that attendees can't chat with anyone. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch that over.
Oh.
Just an FYI.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay, so you should.
If you want to teach us how to use Zoom.
Yeah.
Speaking of O365, can y'all tell that we are a Teams organization normally?
Yes. So I just switched everyone over, so you should be able to kind of send chat messages. So if you can't, I guess let us know somehow, maybe via email. I just want to make sure that everyone is able to chat and ask their questions, submit them any way they can.
Looks
Okay,
like Tom,
I know there is a way
we can use the Q&A.
Correct.
There
Yeah, there's a Q&A. We were probably also referring to the wrong verbiage there, talking about the chat box. So Q&A is open, and now the chat box is open. So apologies for missing that on my end. Thank you.
No worries. So I mean, I guess at this point, you know, there isn't any questions. I can start talking a little bit about some of the different, you know, things that are coming and some of the concerns with security.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what's scaring you the most right now, but yeah, go for it.
I will say that by far the scariest thing is the ability for these AIs to be able to generate things. If anyone's ever used DALL-E or any of these other ChatGPT models, they're really good. You know, like you tell it to make a picture of a unicorn with a cat or whatever on it, and it makes it. It's a pretty good one. And so, you know, the fear right now is that attackers are going to start using these generative tools to start creating really, really complex and really good phishing attempts, for example. I recently had an organization that got a wire transfer out that wasn't supposed to be sent out. Thankfully, their accounting team was able to actually stop it before it happened. But they managed to compromise a user's credentials and then send emails making it seem like it was coming from the CEO. And the CEO, it had his mannerisms for speaking. It had the email genuinely looked like it came from that, to the point that we actually asked the CEO, "Are you sure you didn't forget to send this?" And so I think that's one of the concerns with a lot of these generative AIs. In order for you to be able to train one of these models, you can do with as little as 500 pieces of data. So if someone compromises your CEO's mailbox, they can just grab 500 of their emails, put it into one of these AI models, and then start spitting out emails that look exactly like your CEO's. I think to me, that's probably one of the bigger concerns that I have. You know, these attacks are just going to get more sophisticated. They're going to get harder to detect. And so in a lot of ways, you kind of have to start using tools like AI itself to be able to find AI attacks. I know it's like a Cold War escalation that unfortunately no one wins. Now, the other concern that I have is everyone wants to use these tools. I get requests for Copilot. When's the Copilot preview going to start? When is that going to start? Can we get this going today, tomorrow, that sort of thing? And that's great. People are interested in this technology. They want to start using it. But if they don't use tools that are sort of provided by their IT administration, things that are approved. So, we are going to start using ChatGPT, and under these specific guidelines, users might end up finding their own tools to use. And there's so many different tools built off of ChatGPT. Websites, like there's like resume builders, SAO writers, there's music creation tools out there, and they're all different websites, and all of them have different privacy rules, different data kind of management. And your users might be thinking, I'm going to use ChatGPT. They'll go to a random website that has nothing to do with OpenAI's website. It's just another company that's sort of selling the product. And they have a free way for you to go in and start using ChatGPT to do whatever tasks. And your users are happily using it away. And what's the adage? If you're not paying for a product, you're the product themselves. These tools could be harvesting your users' data. An example of something that happened is some of the developers over at Samsung were using a ChatGPT model for sort of reviewing their code. And they uploaded it, and that caused a big issue because someone literally grabbed a whole bunch of code and pasted it into this random ChatGPT type website. It wasn't actually an official ChatGPT, and that caused a big, in essence, a data exfiltration scenario. So what exactly did you provide to this tool? Did this tool harvest it, keep it? And that just caused a lot of issues. And so, if that is a concern, it's very important for you to have clear use case scenarios with your employees and users, making it very clear, like, hey, we're not going to let you use ChatGPT. They might still kind of violate that. We know that's what shadow IT basically is, when users sort of go outside their way. And so in a lot of ways, if that's something that you feel a lot of your users are going to start using, that it's better to provide the tool in a compliant and secure way, instead of having them go out and sort of do it themselves. And that can definitely have a significant risks. Here at Managed Solution, for example, a lot of people want to use AI tools. Chatbots that can do summaries for messages, for calendar invites, generative text to help you write documents, that sort of stuff. And it's a slow process. Unfortunately, some of the tools from Microsoft are not available yet. That's sort of one of the things that I unfortunately have to keep telling people. Copilot's not out yet. It's going to be out soon, hopefully, probably by the end of the year. And so in that interim state, I think it's important for you to have that conversation with your users and let them know, like, hey, it's coming. Just give us a little bit of time. We'll promise you'll start using all these different tools, and you'll be able to do it in such a way that we're comfortable that you're not, sending a bunch of sensitive information to a random website.
On that note, that's a great dovetail into how is AI already integrated into Microsoft? Because I think that I know that we know there's a lot already existing in the tools that companies are using today, and in the tools that are readily available and accessible for those who want to implement them. But I'm not sure that everyone really knows how deep that goes within the existing tools of Microsoft.
Yeah, so the new AI is referred to as a category as a generative AI. They generate new things out of basic context. But the other categories, machine learning, deep learning, those are built into a lot of the Office 365 services available now. So for example, if you're interested in using machine learning to help improve your security posture, you should be looking at the Defender series of products. Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud, all those different services have baked in machine learning. So they're in essence using AI, they're just not necessarily generating text, because that's not really their goal. Their goal is to find vulnerabilities. Their goal is to find attacks. Their goal is to find all the stuff, not to write a really nice essay for you. And those tools are all baked in. So if you're interested in sort of improving your mail hygiene with your Office 365, then definitely look at Defender for Office 365. That has a lot of advanced AI tools built into it. If you want to take your endpoint protection to the next level, Defender for Endpoint is there for you. Just overall, the whole Defender platform itself just has a lot of those machine learning, deep learning tools built into them.
Awesome. And what about, I'd love to talk a little bit about, if it doesn't take us off rails too much, because I know this can be a really deep topic, but Azure, Viva, those types of tools that are readily available today. I know we've done like full webinars on this, so I don't need to go like way off the deep end, but just high level, how can taking a look at, let's just say Viva and Azure, help an IT manager, director, support the CEO, support their team? Like, what can an IT leader do within their, like, initiate within their company that the team will then turn around in a few months from then and just say like, wow, so cool that you did that. What else can you do?
Yeah, I mean, Viva, for the people not familiar on this call, is what Microsoft refers to as an employee experience platform. It's basically a place for you to be able to hold training, to have a little bit of culture. There's a lot of different tools and services in there. We actually did a webinar for that, I think, a month and a half ago. So you can definitely kind of provide that link if we have it publicly available. So, you know, the Viva employee experience is sort of a secure way to be able to provide sort of those value adds. So we've all been in organizations that they'll kind of use these kind of one-off tools and services to do various different things, whether that is, you know, hosting training, which Viva Learning is an excellent tool for you to host your own training, to Viva Connections to create sort of the internet experience, a modern internet, so people can find, you know, what an organization's about, find the various tools and resources, and understand, you know, who is the who is managed solution in our case, so they can kind of see like, okay, managed solution is like professional services, it's managed services, and these are our core values. And so these employee experiences are really great to kind of provide that infrastructure and sort of that framework. And since they are built into Office 365, they meet all of that sort of baseline governance and security. So everything's backed by Azure Active Directory. The main benefit for Azure Active Directory is that it is it's a highly scalable identity management. So if you are concerned with unifying a single sign-on, using multi-factor authentication, making sure that you have like a baseline for all of your authentication, identity management, all that kind of components, Azure AD is a really excellent service. If you're using Office 365, you are automatically using Azure AD. Office 365 is built on the back of Azure AD. All the tools like conditional access, all these other kind of different services use Azure AD as its identity management system. So if you're not heavily leveraging that, I would definitely recommend going into that, because then you'll be able to start having your global remote workforce, for example, since Azure AD is completely global. No longer have to rely on on-premise Active Directory servers, for example. So yeah, I think that's some of the benefits of going over to those platforms.
Awesome, thank you. Alexis just put a great question in the chat, and I want to make sure everyone sees it. We asked you, what security tools do you want to implement at your company but haven't yet? Please let us know. So Richard, feel free to, if there's something else at the top of mind right now while everyone's thinking about that question, but I wanted to take a pause really quickly here and see what answers we get to this one, because I know for fact that there is something every single person here wants to implement or is thinking about implementing, but hasn't yet. And this is such an amazing forum to kind of answer those questions and just speak to those technologies. I find that a lot of clients come to us asking for help promoting investment in security to their leadership team. And so this right here is such an amazing place and a great, great people right now to help you do that. So if there's something that you want to implement and you want to back it up with, proof or examples and, ROI to your organization, this is a great team to ask.
So we have the first
Dean.
answer. Dean is
Thanks,
interested
Dean.
in using SSO and device
You
management.
like get a prize for being the first person to ask a question.
Yeah, so SSO, so that is sort of the SAML based integration with Azure AD. Really, I highly recommend every organization to look at the different identity. No worries, Dean. So a lot of different organizations have a lot of different systems and applications. Salesforce, on-premise Active Directory. They have all these different services that they're leveraging to be productive. And Azure AD and single sign-on allows you to sort of centralize all those different credentials, all of those different user accounts, and the provisioning process for those into one single place. So, for example, when a new employee starts and you're using Salesforce, you just have to create the account one time, and then it'll automatically kind of push it out to all the different services that you're using. Salesforce is a good example for that. It also integrates with pretty common human resources applications and services like Workday. So you can literally have your HR person go in, create an account in Workday, have it push into Azure Active Directory, and then magically it gets deployed everywhere on all your different services. Really helps automate that process. It also helps when deboarding employees. Unfortunately, we do have to make staffing changes. People move on to better jobs. Whatever that happens, and integrating with Azure AD and the SSO can further automate that. So when an employee leaves an organization, you can very quickly right-click, disable an account, and then that kicks off all sorts of automation. So I do highly recommend everyone to start using Azure AD as your single sign-on and start sort of limiting all that. Device management. So Intune, one of my preference, I think the first thing I ever got architected level was Intune. So it has a fun, a fun spot in my heart. Oh yeah, Dean maybe is interested in actually chatting with me. Let's see. Anyway.
Maybe we can unmute him if he wants to be. I don't know if he answered. If you want to get a conversation
Not
going.
yet.
Not yet. Okay, cool.
Not yet.
No worries.
Okay. No
so Intune, Intune is Microsoft's premier. So if you're using Windows devices, you're more likely going to be using Intune sometime in the near future. Things like Autopilot, which is a component of Intune, is I think front and center when it comes to device deployments. If you've ever had any issues with deploying devices to your end users, Autopilot is an excellent tool, and that's part of Intune. You can't really have one or the other. And so it's very common for organizations to start leveraging Intune for that specific reason. And if you're already going to start using Intune for your Windows 10 deployment, then it makes sense to then extend that. You're already paying for a license for your end users, so maybe we want to start bringing in Android devices, Apple devices, and start doing that sort of device management. So in a lot of ways, it can be your sort of default into device management platform going forward. A lot of organizations are happy with that specific component. Separately, if you're currently using Active Directory and you are interested in maybe moving fully into Azure AD and having a full cloud environment, if you're using group policy, which is sort of the management aspect that Active Directory provides, Intune is the replacement for that. So if you do move over to Azure AD for your Windows 10, Windows 11 group policy management, you'd be sort of transitioning over to the Intune configuration management instead of group policy. It's kind of one of the tricky things that a lot of organizations have trouble with when switching over to Azure AD for their identity management systems.
Richard, while we're waiting for Dean here, and also you guys will get the replay. So I know that, again, there's a lot of information here, so you can watch that back and implement it internally to your organization. Richard, how would you help somebody like Dean or anyone on this call to explain the ROI on implementing these types of tools? Because I know I find that we often talk about, the benefits of it, but how do we translate that to the conversation with the CEO or the CFO in a way that they can really understand? Because so often they have a hard time comprehending what does it mean to be able to deploy something quickly and easily remotely to your employees. I mean, that's an easy one, but the level of actual ROI there could be huge. So able to help with that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the specific service. Like you mentioned in Tune, it's a pretty clear use case scenario. There's so much time that's wasted in deploying devices to your end users. So I think autopilot sort of pays for itself relatively quickly. So if you get to the point where you can have autopilot up and running and you can start literally drop shipping devices to your end users, that's a very clear ROI. You know, before you take 2, 3, 4 hours to deploy a Windows 10 device, and now you can do it in literally completely hands off. User just signs in with their Office 365 credentials. So for that one, I think it's relatively easy to understand. I think where it's going to be a little bit difficult to kind of provide the ROIs is really going to be with a lot of these AI tools that are coming out. I do agree that, you know, I suspect that a lot of these tools are going to come out and they're going to be expensive, just to be blunt. Like Microsoft can totally come out with like a $20, $30 user SKU. And then, you know, these tools are amazing, but then you're going to have to justify that to your, you know, accounting teams, finance team, whoever that may be. And so I think where the value is really to kind of consider this as a sort of a force multiplier, whether that is, you know, Copilot or Security Copilot, which is a security specific version of that. These tools are really a way for you to have people be more productive and be able to handle more work in less time, right? So it kind of removes a lot of the minutia that day-to-day work. So if they have to kind of compose an email, they can have ChatGPT, Copilot generate that email and kind of send it out. So we're talking about more tickets completed, more sales calls completed. We're talking about all those kind of different metrics. And if you're an organization that heavily relies on KPIs, these tools directly help increase those KPIs, right? So like I said, more calls generated, more tickets handled, more devices manufactured eventually as you go to that. And so, you know, from some of the tests and some of the internal pilots that Microsoft has done, they've had anywhere from a 20% increase in efficiency to, in some cases, 77% increase in efficiency, just depending on the specific use case scenarios. So then you kind of have to value. So if I can have users be 20, 30% more productive, and I'm paying a $20 per user SKU, that's a pretty simple sort of ROI. Again, it just depends on how you're measuring your employees' productivity. And so studies have shown that these generative AIs and a lot of the early adopters have shown that there's a lot of significant time that gets saved by using these AI tools.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. That's insane. But again, that's, you know, that's amazing growth, right? Straddling using these tools in a way that only improves things and doesn't actually, you know, hurt the company. I think that's also going to be a fine line that people are going to have to learn based on what I'm hearing from you. Tom asked a great question too, and I would love to pose this to the group. For those of you leading IT teams, is the business or other members of leadership coming to you and asking for AI? And if so, how do you respond today? So that's a really great question. And if the answer is no, I'd be curious to know that too. If you never get questions about AI and, you know, from your team and it's not really a top of mind, you could say no in the chat. I'd be really curious to hear from you guys. While we're waiting on those answers, Richard, you know, and going back to the whole AI thing, I think there's a tendency for customers to just choose the tools that they know or that they've heard about, that they're comfortable with, rather than diving into, you know, more advanced conversations like this one about security. And I think we could even see, like, I don't know, I think that if people were really excited about this and there wasn't as much, there's some maybe intimidation or trepidation around these advanced conversations, we'd get so many questions, right? But, you know, is it a lack of knowledge, do you think? Or, you know, what do you think that's about? And, you know, can you help us understand how they can start, you know, moving into topics that maybe they're not so familiar with? Or technology?
Yeah, it's a pretty common issue. So we do a lot of Teams implementations as a Microsoft partner, and it's very common to get those people that are just not Slack they live and breathe Slack, or they live and breathe Google Workspace or whatever. Ultimately, when adopting a new technology, it's a really good idea to understand what are the challenges with either the existing technology, in essence, understanding what this is going to solve for. Doing a change for change sake is often very negative. Like, people don't want to switch tools, they don't want to switch other things. But if you tie it to, hey, when you're using Slack, you can't do XYZ. But now that we're moving over to Teams, then we can do that. Or, we're implementing this security thing, and it's going to make your life easier because then you're not going to have to worry about XYZ type of scenario. Really tying it back down to specific scenarios and specific goals, instead of it just being a change for change sake, is usually the key thing. The other thing I recommend is to really do understand who your audience is, who your users are, and try to find out the ones that are the most negative about any specific change or anything like that, and try to understand where they're coming from. What is the hesitation with using Copilot? Why is the hesitation for you to use Microsoft Teams or SharePoint or Viva or any of these different kind of services? And spend time and understand their viewpoint, and hopefully that helps you build out a better solution, and hopefully kind of greases the wheels a little bit of that change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that I hear about from our clients, senior leadership in the C-suite coming to IT leadership saying, I heard about this thing. SSO actually is one of them. AI for sure is one of them. Other ways, for employees to do, save their passwords and log in securely and not have to remember passwords or write them down in an Excel sheet. Like, these are the types of things that I think CEOs are coming to IT leadership and asking for. And so, like you said, don't change for change's sake, but explore. Really, really appreciate that answer.
Yeah, it's critically important to identify the stakeholders, identify the people that are, going to be hurdles in the process implementation. Like, we all know who they are, right? So in an organization, you understand who are the people that are going to say no to any change or anything like that happens. Engaging them early, getting them on your side makes implementation so much easier. So I really do recommend, starting with that. Understand who your audience is, and just targeting them, making them happy. If at the end of the day they turn from people against change to actual champions for the change, you'll see that things go a lot smoother. And that happens a lot. Like, I deal with that all the time. We had an organization that just was so morally against SharePoint. They're just like, I hate SharePoint. I don't want to use SharePoint. We're never going to use SharePoint. The whole accounting team just refused to use SharePoint. And so, the organization's goal was to move to Microsoft Teams, and they just didn't want to use Teams or SharePoint. And so, after a couple working sessions with the department heads and understanding what their use case scenarios, we were able to find solutions to their problems that ultimately got them to the point where they were excited to start embracing the change.
And you just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, we're not the type of organization that just gives you the information and like leaves you to it. Myself and my counterparts on the, our entire team, technical and sales and, supporting roles as well, we will all help our customers bring the story and bring the visuals and the deeper understanding to those individuals at your organization so that they can really make that decision with you and not be working against you for change. So thanks for that anecdote, Richard. It's actually a really great story and I want to hear more about it later. So I'll ask you as well, how do you determine the maturity level of security within an organization? I have a feeling that those on this call right now, this may be a boring question for them, but again, that's sort of a factor of all of us kind of like working in our own bubble and feeling like, oh, we made this change last year, we made this change this year, and now we're ahead of the curve, How do you recommend looking at that maturity level of security within a company? And, what steps should IT leaders take to make sure that they really are at meeting that edge that their organization needs to meet?
Yeah. So There's a couple different ways you can approach it. You can approach it from a technology standpoint. So what technology you're using. So things like, do you have single sign-on? Do you have MFA? Are you using threat protection? Are you reviewing your existing security posture? To the other side of things, which is people, process, and technology, which is, you hear Sean say that all the time. So, do you understand what is, who are your users? What process are they following? What is the important services, right? So I can say I want to turn on SSO and MFA, but to what? To, what are we turning on MFA? What is a priority? So really understanding what are your sort of high risk resources, applications, servers, whatever that may be. And, if you have a clearly documented, hey, these are priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 thing, then that kind of provides a little bit of kind of understanding whether or not you've gone through that practice. So if you haven't done that, I would definitely say, get started with that, identify your most sensitive services, application servers, and then from there on, apply. Are we using SSO on these services? Are we doing MFA? Do we have active threat protection? Are we using machine learning? Are we doing proactive hunting? All those kind of different conversations to really understand. A lot of organizations sort of think, okay, I have Office 365 and I have MFA and SSO for Office 365, and therefore we're good to go. But if you're using Salesforce, if you're using another service, then you really do have to apply the same ideas to Salesforce. Like, are we doing the same types of protections for the data in there, the access, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend, have you done that assessment? Have you had the conversations of what's important? And then after that, sort of go through a pre-traditional sort of kind of tool review. And ultimately, at the highest level, organizations should be doing regularly sort of quarterly reviews of how they're doing things. So I would definitely say, you start off with just not really knowing what you're doing, then you understand what your more sensitive things, then you've gone through the process of deployed all the different tools, and then finally at the very highest level, you are doing quarterly reviews of how you can improve everything. So I would definitely say that's sort of kind of the maturity level that organizations kind of go through.
How do you go about starting to identify those more sensitive applications or servers?
Well, I like to use Microsoft RAMP. I know it's a fancy word or whatever, but the idea behind that is to sort of quantify the cost value of your applications and services. So for example, if this service goes offline or gets hacked, then that means we're going to lose $9 million of revenue per day. As an example, that puts it at a pretty high priority. And so going through and seeing the actual monetary value of what your applications and services do and putting cost value really allows you to sort of identify what's a higher priority. Here at Managed Solutions, we use ConnectWise for our ticketing system, is probably tier 0. So our most important asset is ConnectWise. If you have opened up tickets with that, is part of our managed services. And so for us, CW is a tier 1, highest one. If that thing goes offline, that's a lot of revenue that gets lost because we can't get to tickets, we can't do a lot of things. And so doing that practice with it, an organization and understanding like, if Office 365 goes offline, we can still take in patients, we can still do all these other different things, then I would potentially put that at a lower level. But if you're a healthcare company and you're using Epic, if Epic goes down, then you can't look up patient charts, you can't look up all these different things, and sort of prioritizing what is the most important thing, and then modifying your security strategy to sort of meet your highest priority items.
That's phenomenal. Thank you so much. Guys, you have 9 more minutes to ask Richard your questions. Please take advantage of it. I hope that so far our conversation has been really useful to you. And I would actually be curious to know, of all the things that we talked about, what's one nugget that you are taking away from this conversation as of right now? What's one thing that we talked about that has been really helpful to you? We would really appreciate hearing about that, because again, we want this to be a dialogue and get our community more engaged. So knowing what's important to you will help us understand what to put out more, for you for free and to engage. Thank you, Richard. Do you have any other, I want to kind of hand the floor to you as well. I've been asking a lot of questions. Is there something that we haven't covered today that you feel is important for this group to know and about this topic of AI and security?
Yeah, so I think one topic that we haven't necessarily talked about is the limitations in AI. So we've talked about, how AI can affect your end users, how AI can help improve productivity, but we haven't necessarily talked the limitations. So unfortunately, AI is not science fiction AI. You can't have you can have conversations, but it's not an actual like super, what is it called, general AI. And so there's limitations with that. There's a couple of things that you should be on the lookout when you're leveraging AI tools. Number one is that you can be wrong. So just to be completely upfront, and you ask an AI and it could be wrong. It can write an email that's incorrect, factually incorrect. Microsoft recently had a security event where they sort of showcased how Copilot for security works. And they asked a very basic question for their AI, and they were like, what versions of Windows are vulnerable to this specific CVE or vulnerability? And it came back by saying Windows 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, as we all know, Windows 9 does not exist. It's not something that actually Microsoft, for whatever reason, decided to go from 8 straight to 10. But AI, it knows that generally speaking, numbers go 7, 8, 9, and 10, and so it gave that answer. And so it's very important as you start leveraging these tools to have at least someone go in and spot check it, right? So if you have it write an email, if you have it generate an Azure runbook, if you have it generate a PowerShell script or anything like that, you need to make sure that you go in and you double check it. Make sure it's not going to kind of blow anything up and cause any sort of negative impact to your process. The second thing that I recommend is understand that, especially the language models, ChatGPT, they're built on a specific amount of data from a specific date. So for example, if you were to ask it for new events or anything in the last like 6, 7 years or how long it was, it doesn't know that. These language models are sort of built at a specific time and place, and they're not aware of new events. So you can't ask it, can you tell me today's news? Unless, of course, it gets integrated with another system. Things like Bing Chat and Copilot can pull in relevant information, but it may not be aware of, it can't speak like someone because it doesn't have the actual kind of language data that is sort of kind of built out. And then the last one, and this is probably the more important one, is most of these AI models are trained using internet data. And the internet can sometimes be a terrible place. And so be aware that they might have, part of the reason why everyone's sort of doing a slow rollout, Google Bard, ChatGPT, OpenAI, Microsoft, is because these AI models rely on internet data. And internet data is a little bit of a Wild West. And so, we famously had during the presentation for Google Bard, which is Microsoft's ChatGPT, Google's ChatGPT competitor, asked the question that it gave wrong information because it probably pulled it from some document that was incorrect somewhere on the internet. And so, kind of combining those different bits and pieces, it's important for you to ultimately just double check everything that your AI is sort of doing, whether that's a generative AI like ChatGPT or whether or not it's just basic machine learning. There's always a possibility that the data might be a little bit too old, the data might be wrong, or it might even be racist. Which is, famously, Microsoft actually tried to do a chat bot a couple years back, and it very quickly turned very, very, very mean to people. And so, yeah, that's always a kind of fun anecdote to be like, yeah, we built the first AI, and it very quickly looked at the internet and just became a mean old.
Wow.
It was, yes, that is the specific name of the AI Tay.
I did not know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's the main reason why Microsoft's slow rolling out Copilot and Google is slow rollout as well, is because they don't want like we're all in a business, and we don't want the drunk uncle AI to be reading our emails or sending an email to the CEO. So they're very much slow rolling out these all these different AI tools, especially anything that actually generates text. Just want to make sure that it's not doing anything workplace inappropriate.
That's a big deal. It's not something, and you know what, honestly, as a lay user of this stuff, like, it's not something I would have thought of personally, if I had that at my fingertips today and I was using it, of course I would check my work because that's just what I would do, but I would never think that something like that that's available to people would produce that type of result. So good to know. Good to know the history, so we don't repeat it, right?
Yeah.
The one last thing I would love to touch on, I know we just have a few minutes left, is, you mentioned earlier that because of the actual, accuracy of these AI tools, we are receiving emails and chats, and in the future, potentially likely, maybe even phone calls and things that really look and feel like they're coming from somebody in our organization that we can trust. So these tools that we're using to help our employee base, make sure that they know what to look out for, we'll have to evolve with that.
Mhm.
Do you have anything that you want to share that's relevant today on looking out for those types of things that may be currently coming through, email and other forms of communication?
Yeah, I mean, definitely look at the process and procedure in general, right? So obviously, if you get an email, if you think it's suspicious or maybe it doesn't look, you should have controls in place to prevent someone clicking into it from ruining your business. So people process the component that Sean's always talking about, and so having a CEO be able to do like a wire transfer with a simple call is going to be a weak point going forward, right? Because it's going to be easy for you to replicate a cell phone, right? We all know SMS currently is at the lower end when it comes to multi-factor authentication, because it can't be spoofed, copied. Police can go in and stingray your cell phone, and then you can't really rely on understanding who the voice is of the other person, because now they can do kind of general. So in a lot of these important processes, it's important to no longer rely on insecure communication methods. Just to be blunt, if your CEO is currently used to calling someone and making a wire transfer, highly recommend you move away from that and create another process, something that is hardened against those kinds of attacks. So when someone does submit a wire transfer, have it go through appropriate process and procedure, have a couple other people kind of take a look at it. In the example that I provided, it was caught because the accounting team reviews every single wire transfer before it gets sent out, right? So having those procedures, having those people kind of trained in, and hardening the types of communications that you're using to operate your business are the recommendations that I would have. And like I said, certainly don't rely on cell phones anymore. SMS, calling, all that functionality, it's a weak spot. So definitely, if like you want me to do a wire transfer, awesome. Can you please submit an appropriate form, and I'll get that done for you. Kind of painful, but that's the best way you can protect against those kinds of things.
That's a really good point. And you talked about wire transfers, also like requests for information, sensitive banking information. I've seen companies get hit with that. So all good points. Richard, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, bringing your knowledge and everything you have to this phone call. Everyone on our call, thank you very much for attending and spending this time with us. We have so much appreciation and respect for the positions that you're in every single day. It's tough to keep up, so that you spent an hour with us means a lot. And we hope that you will again in the future as we roll more of these opportunities to collaborate with you out from our team. So thank you. And Alexis, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say to wrap up other than that.
Other than thank you, no, we'll have a copy of today's call as well for those of you that are interested, and I'll include or all of our contact information for any additional questions you may have that maybe you didn't think of on today's call. But thank you all so much for joining. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.